Look, it's a great to be here and take you through the results again. Look, I think the thing what I want to first point out is, we've been working with Wingecarribee for a long time on this sort of research, so we've got some historical trend data that we've looked at as well here. But I think the first thing we do is when we're talking about research is to give an understanding of what is research and what are surveys. And there is a distinct difference. Essentially, the role of research is to give you a measure of where the community is on something. Whereas that's what research is. Surveys are things that you can see online. They can be Facebook, they can be whatever, and they're representative of only those people that take part. So let me take you today through the process we undertook for Wingecarribee's most recent survey, and how we went about that. First thing we did was we actually contacted a sample size of yourselves, the residents across the LGA. So how does that sort of work in terms of sample size? Because some people think big samples are really important, but sample size is only, or the size of sample is only valid if you're actually talking about a representative survey. To give a sense around this, when they do polling across the country, they do a sample size of 1,000 to represent the views of 18 million voters. So that's a large sample, and the error rate for a sample size of 1,000 is about plus or minus 3%, which means 19 times out of 20, you'd expect the results being within that framework. Now, what we did at Wingecarribee, obviously the population is significantly less than 18 million, and we had a sample size of 400. And within the realms of that, that's a really robust sample. It's got something called a confidence limit of plus or minus 5%, which means 19 times out of 20, we expect the results to be within 5%. And I think one of the things to point about here is with research, you don't want to see massive changes unless there's been change. Quite often, if you see volatility in data, it means it may not be correctly collected. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Now, I said a moment ago about the difference between opt-in samples via Facebook or Instagram or social media and even council websites, and how that compares against representative research, which is a carefully drawn up poll of people or a sample of people. So one example of this most recently that I've done, which is I think a really clear example of the difference between the sort of person who takes part in general research and a person who opts in to take part, is in this particular slide here. Now, I've used this slide for many case studies, and actually other professionals in the category use it as well, because it's such a good example of where you can see that a consultation could have been hijacked or could have been prioritised around only those loudest voices, the ones that you hear in the room, rather than the broader community. The two measures on this page, the orange set of scores refer to a representative sample, a representative foam sample of the community that we captured across the entire LGA of about 120,000 people. And then, of course, there was the opt-in survey, and that's in the light blue. Now, the thing in there is a representative sample had 400, which, as I said, had an error rate of plus or minus 5%. The opt-in engagement had nearly 1,000 people. There's no confidence limit. This is only reflective of those people that take part. And some people say, well, an opt-in sample still gives you clarity around data, and it does give you about priorities of the people who take part. But looking here, if the representative sample had 1% of the community saying that all weather or artificial turf was important, but the opt-in sample had 21%, I don't know how you'd factor that down. And I think the thing about this would mean that if you based your priorities only on opt-in samples, you'd be misleading, or you'd be misled. And the other thing here is that the people who took part in the online consultation, no surprise looking at that data, if we're talking about more and improved sporting facilities and artificial turf, were the sporting people. So they were the netball mums and dads who took part in the engagement because they wanted to do the best about their children, but we wanted to make sure we had a representative sample of the community. So that's a bit of background to research. In terms of the specifics of the research we undertook for Wingecarribee this time around, again, we have done this survey a number of times. Key things about this is to understand the community's priorities. We want to explore your experience with contacting council. We want to understand your satisfaction with the performance of the organisation, and as well as across different service areas that they provide, and understand, what are your attitudes towards services moving forward. Now, how did we do this? We had a mixed methodology this time around, so we predominantly had mobile phone sample database, and we also had some people from an online panel. This is not, as I said, a Facebook panel, but rather an online research panel of people who we contacted as well. In total, 430 odd people completed the survey. And within that framework, as I said, a margin of error around about plus or minus 5%. And you can see that a research was undertaken at the start of this year. What did we do after we've collected the data? Well, after the interviewers have finished interviewing, and the job is wrapped up, we then pull down the data. We then prepare a top line, but before we prepare a top line of the data, we then weight the data by the demographics of the LGA. In this case, we weighted it by the demographics from the ABS in 2021. It's still the most recent sort of profile that we have. We can see here that the population skewed slightly male. We certainly skew older in terms of the population. You can see over 18, we've got around 60% of people 50 plus. We had a range of people. The majority lived in Australia. Were born in Australia, and we've also got long-term residents. So about 2/3 of residents have been living in the area for more than 20 years plus. And you can see across the different locations, we captured a good representation of the key towns and villages across Wingecarribee. So one of the first things we ask people is, what do they value most about the area? And this is an open-ended response, so there's no coding here. We code the results after we've achieved them, so it's just an open response. So you can say what you like. And what we can see here is that when people talk about the best things about living in the LGA, it is about the natural open spaces. It's the abundance of life. There's nature all around you. It's about a community that's tight-knit, friendly, and connected. There's a country lifestyle. It's relaxed and happy vibe around it. So these are the positive things about that rural lifestyle that you enjoy in Wingecarribee. And of course, we've still got the convenience to Sydney. If you need to go there, you can go there, but you're not living there, which is what the community, in terms of living in Wingecarribee, do enjoy. Now, one of the challenges I think about that sort of living in a regional LGA just outside of Sydney is you certainly see the differences between the level of servicing between a metro council and a regional council. And there is challenges there in terms of the size and in terms of the resourcing available to the councils as well. So in terms of the priorities, we asked the community, what are the top priorities you'd like council to focus on? And I'm just going to show you the top 4 that came out. And we can see the top 4, number 1 by a long shot, with nearly 60% of the community talked about, was about improving and maintaining roads. And that's actually gone up significantly since the last survey back in 2023. So that's almost doubled. It's gone from both 40% to 60% there. And in terms of infrastructure and development as well, that's another one which has increased. That's gone from about 6% to 13%. The other ones rounding that out talk about development, housing and traffic management. They all sort of correlate around growth in terms of, there is increased population coming in. There is that challenge to infrastructure that maybe hasn't extended beyond where it currently is. And you've now got more people coming in, or at least a perception of that. These are sort of challenges for any regional council, and particularly for those on the hinterland of Sydney metropolitan area who have a lot of Sydney-siders coming through potentially. In terms of the customer experience, when you deal with council, we found that just over half of the residents we spoke to had actually contacted council in the last 12 months. And you can see back all across the surveys in the past here, I'm just going to get a laser up here. If we talk about all the different surveys in the past, we can talk back in 2012, around half the population has said they'd been in contact with council, and we can see that's been consistent across the board. Around about 50% had been in contact with council in some way, shape or form. So around half of you have had a council experience. And how does that work in terms of how satisfied were you with the contact you had with council? We use a unipolar scale here. You can see that you're either not at all satisfied, the absence of all satisfaction, and then some degree of satisfied all the way to being very satisfied. Think of it like 1 star, 2 star, 3 star, 4 star, 5 star. How have you looked across this? Well, I think the key thing I'd like to call out in this sort of thing here is, first of all, look at the improvement in the top 5, in that top box there. We've gone from 12% saying they were very satisfied to 25% saying they're very satisfied. We've seen a seismic jump in satisfaction with the customer experience between 2024, where 54% of you said you're at least somewhat satisfied with the experience, all the way to 71% of you now. There is still a bit of dissonance. The blokes, we're still grumpier generally by a general notion, and in this case we certainly are seeing that as well. But across the board here, we can see that satisfaction was sort of consistent across many years. Around 2019, we then started dropping. This one of the impacts here is possibly COVID, fires, floods, and all the different issues that have afflicted and you've all suffered through. But now we seem to be coming out of that. We can see the 71% of residents at least moderately satisfied. And that's sort of coming back in line with the regional benchmarks. Our regional benchmarks is based on about 50 to 60 councils we work with regularly across the New South Wales regions. Another question we asked about your community is satisfaction with the level of communication that you're currently being provided by council. Talking here, we can see here again, back in 2012, we're at 2010, we're at 86%. We're sort of, again, pretty much similar to the last one there. We can see a decline around 2019 where it dips down. Of course, in 2021, you went through the administration, and now as we see, the scores are improving again across the board here. This is consistent across all demographics. You can see here that males and females equally. Age is fairly consistent as well. No difference between town and village. One of the key slides, and I'm going to show you that now, is overall satisfaction with council performance, and this is one that we keep across many LGAs. And over the last few years, as I said, we've seen declines across regional New South Wales, particularly since even COVID, pre-COVID with the fires, and then we had COVID kick in. With yourselves, obviously the unique situation of Wingecarribee now having its elected council back, we can see some shifts over time. I'll start here. First of all, at 2019, we had 77% of residents at least somewhat satisfied. We can see it drops down to 65, 61, 49, and this time it's jumped back up to 73%. That's probably the largest change I've seen across a council organisation on this particular measure in a 2-year period ever. So it's a really good reflection of the fact that community is far more satisfied with what's being provided them now. You've moved out of administration and you have your own representatives. Looking across the board here again, men are still a little bit more softer in terms of satisfaction, but it's consistent across the board. 35 to 49-year-olds have the softest satisfaction. Those 65 plus generally tend to be happier. So too those living in villages. Those two living in towns. And you can see here really the changes here. We've seen really significant shifts downwards from the nose. Not at all satisfied has dropped from 1 in 5 to 1 in 10. So it's really shifted up in terms of satisfaction. As I said, this is a strong result. I haven't seen something such a quick turnaround. And obviously, you'd sit there and say, well, what's the only thing that's happened? And that has been, the new elections and a new council coming in. As you'd expect with something like this, how has that impacted council scores here? In terms of council image was consistently about 40-odd% where people are saying they're a good to excellent image of council. That dropped right down to a really low of 14%. So one in six, less than 1 in 6 were saying they were at least a good excellent version of council. This has doubled again over the time period. So a positive outcome as well there in terms of image. In terms of dealing with the new elected council, about a quarter of you have actually had dealings with the elected council. So this is obviously something. Sorry, this is in terms of this. This is in the last 12 months. So that's a reasonable number of you have had contact with council. In terms of how you've rated your experiences with council, now the 2022 and the 2024 results talk about the administration. So we're just going to really looking at particularly 2024 is the low tide mark here in terms of satisfaction. We can see there's been a significant uplift over the period. So while the administration scored some reasonable results back in 2022, very much softened by 2024, and then of course we've seen the uplift now, or the upswing in terms of results, which are now back in line with what we saw back in 2022. So that's been a shift upwards. There's many different service areas at council office. I think there's about 40 that we do research on. I'm just going to give you some top level data around those as well now. In terms of that, we can see, which are the things that are most important to you and which are the things that have the lowest levels of important. Of the 40 different service areas, we can see here that the T2 box, which refers to the top 2 box importance, a proportion of you that said it was important or very important to you. Water, of course, is in a high 90s at 97 and then 96. Domestic waste collection is at 95, sewage services at 93, and local roads at 92. So all those are really important to the vast majority of the population. In terms of those with lower importance, and when I say lower importance, it's not low importance. I think, the lowest rated service area for council still has at least 60% of you saying it's important or very important to you. After that, we've got revitalisation of the town centres, we've got pools, community halls, and support for the Aboriginal community, all, with between 60 to 70% of the community saying it's important. We only ask satisfaction if someone says something's important to us. And so we look down the list, the top performing areas in terms of the top 6 areas in terms of satisfaction revolve around libraries, sewage, domestic waste, water, community safety and support for arts and culture. So all those are providing good levels of community satisfaction. The lowest scores are around the areas. We can see here that particularly roads. Roads is at 20%. That is obviously a fairly low score for roads in terms of people saying they're at least somewhat satisfied, 3, 4, or 5 out of 5. That's actually significantly uplifted on what we saw last time around when it was at 12% back in 2024. So there has been some improvements in that space as well over the time, but obviously still a focus for yourselves, as you said from the priorities earlier. It continues to be a focus, and with the rain and the impact that has on the surface of the roads, it is a challenge. After that, we've got development, opportunities to participate, and access to public transport are the areas of lower levels of satisfaction. In terms of how does this look compared to our benchmarks, I'm only showing you the ones where we really see a different change here. So support for youth is important to 87% of your community, which is 12 points higher than what we see across our regional benchmarks. The converse, that would be town centres, 60%, which is 15% lower than our regional benchmarks. I'd say here is an example where to interpret this data would be, obviously you want a greater focus on your youth. In terms of your town centres, it's probably because they're already in a good state and they are actually performing well compared to other regional areas, that it's less of a priority for your community because you've already addressed that. In terms of satisfaction, again, you might be surprised to see this, but your cleanliness and functionality of public toilets compared to other regional councils is significantly higher. So to your community safety and crime prevention, the lowest scores there around roads and development, and roads is obviously well below benchmarks. Across all of this, I mean, the key things to take out of this is we've seen a real shift in terms of perceptions now that you have an elected council again that is moving things forward and planning for your future. In terms of a scorecard, we show a scorecard for the councils to give them a sense of how they go. Our scores are 80% plus satisfaction is a good score. Between 60 and the 79 is an area to consolidate and build upon, at least monitor. And under 60 is areas where we'd be saying that you'd like to see some changes in that space. And across all the different service areas, there's only 4 which are under 60. Roads, which is a perennial problem, and I think ever since I've been reporting to Wingecarribee, that's been a challenge. Opportunities to participate in decision making, well, I guess it is that's coming back now. You have an elected members, so you can contact them. After that, the challenges around development and growth, which is obviously something that's going to continue to impact on the area in terms of the long-term future. But on the whole, I think this is a sort of a validation that the move to the council is heading in the right direction, and planning from now moving forward is around the future to help make the community a much better place. Thank you very much for your time.